Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar where we'll be introducing the Disaster Philanthropy Playbook, a joint effort of the Center for Disaster Philanthropy and the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers in association with a forum of regional associations of grantmakers. Hi everybody, my name is Bob Ottenhoff and I'm the President and CEO of the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. The Center for Disaster Philanthropy has the unique mission of working to transform the way donors and organizations look at disaster recovery. We believe it's vitally important to be involved in the full arc of disasters, not just the immediate response, but engaging in preparation, long-term recovery, and building resilient communities. In forming CDP, we were struck by the lack of information about best practices and successful experiences in dealing with disasters. Our hope is that the playbook will fill that void and be a comprehensive resource for all grant makers. I'm joined today by Nina Stack, the President of the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers, who played a pivotal role in the creation of the playbook. CNJG is the Center for Philanthropy in New Jersey, serving the leading independent corporate, family, and community foundations, as well as public grant makers of the state of New Jersey. We also have with us today Elizabeth Murphy, who has led efforts on behalf of the CDP and CNJG to develop the playbook during the past year. Elizabeth has more than 25 years of experience working in the nonprofit and philanthropic sectors, including both statewide and national initiatives. Since Hurricane Sandy made landfall in October 2013, she's worked with the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers to coordinate the Council's activities relating to the post-Sandy philanthropic response in New Jersey. Before we get started, a few bits of housekeeping. We're recording this webinar and it will be made available to both the forum and on the CDP website. You may submit a question at any time using either the Q&A or the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. Simply select Host from the drop-down list, type your question, and hit Send. We'll do our best to get to all of your questions by the end of this webinar. And now I'd like to introduce David Beamsdorfer. He's the President and CEO of the Forum of Regional Associations of Grantmakers. And the Forum is a philanthropic network comprised of 33 regional associations of grantmakers with more than 5,500 participating organizations, making it the largest network in American philanthropy. With deep regional roots and a broad nationwide reach, the Forum Network facilitates effective philanthropy that strengthens communities and improves lives throughout the United States. And David, this is your second week on the job as the new president of the Forum, and we want to thank you very much for participating. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Bob. And on my second week, no other place I'd rather be than being part of this webinar and this great new tool for the field. It's really my pleasure to welcome all of you to today's webinar on behalf of the Forum of Regional Associations of Grantmakers. The Forum is pleased to be a partner in the Disaster Philanthropy Playbook with a Forum member, the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers, and with the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. The Playbook is a great example of what can happen when you bring together the Forum network with our deep regional roots and broad nationwide reach with a national philanthropy organization like CDP that has deep content expertise on a critical issue for our field. When a disaster strikes, regional associations are looked to immediately to play a number of critical roles. They track and share how philanthropy is responding, serve as a clearinghouse of information and resources, are a convener to help their members and others work together in both the short-term response and long-term recovery, and much more. The Playbook is a great resource to help regional associations, as well as their philanthropy members and community partners, to think through and plan ahead for the roles that you all will play during a disaster in your region in a thoughtful, proactive, strategic way, rather than scrambling to figure things out on the fly once a disaster hits. I'd like to extend my deep thanks to Nina Stack and everyone at the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers for playing a tremendous leadership role, both on the regional and national level on this issue, and also to Bob Ottenhoff and everyone at the Center for Disaster Philanthropy for being such a great partner of the Forum Network. And now I'll turn it over to you, Bob, to get things started.
Great. Hey, thank you so much, David, and thanks to all the folks at the forum. It's now my pleasure to introduce Elizabeth Murphy, who's led our efforts during this past year or so to develop the playbook. And Elizabeth, thanks for all your great work, and we're looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Thanks very much, Bob. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for taking the time to be with us today so we can introduce the Disaster Philanthropy Playbook to you and give you a walkthrough of the site. So hopefully you're all seeing the home page of the playbook right now. And I just want to start by saying we're extremely grateful to so many of you on the webinar today and to your colleagues around the country for sharing with us such valuable information for inclusion in the playbook. You know, it was the compilation and the research of all of this rich content that has enabled us to bring this vision to life. And so we're extremely grateful to all of you for your help in that. So we're going to navigate our way through the site today, and I'm going to point out some of the pages, which I hope will give you a good understanding of all the playbook has to offer. First, I want to share with you that the site was designed and built by Oki Nestor and his firm called On Design, in cooperation with another technology partner called Van West Media. Oki and his team were able to take our overall vision for the playbook and create this dynamic site. And he's built some wonderful functionality into the site, and I'll be drawing your attention to that as we go along today. So first, you'll see the hero image at the top of the home page, and it contains a header that is on a loop that continuously highlights the different issues that are addressed in the main strategy section. So if you see here, this is changing advocacy, legal aid, and public policy, and it will loop again. Now it says aging and disabled populations. And these are hyperlinks, which are going to take you to those particular issue areas. So they correspond with this section here. You see this drop-down box that talks about all of the different issues that are contained within this main strategy section. So this is really the heart of the playbook, and the information is organized around issues that correspond to many grant-making areas of focus, such as housing and health, education, community recovery, and others. So we didn't want to organize this information around a particular disaster because what we learned in New Jersey after Hurricane Sandy struck is that the actual disaster was less important. How we actually can work together to help communities prepare and respond was really the key messaging that was most important for the philanthropic community. And we certainly learned that from so many colleagues around the country, and we're grateful that we were able to put some of that learning, hopefully to good use in this playbook in partnership with all of you. So we're going to dive into some of these strategies in just a couple of minutes, but I want to scroll down the home page here and point out a few other things. So this section here just calls attention to our major stakeholders whom this playbook is for, and a brief description of how we see all of you using and benefiting from the information. So these are not hyperlinks, but rather we're just calling attention to all of the primary audiences. You know, this playbook is for the philanthropic community. It is information that the philanthropic community at large has shared with us on how they have helped their communities prepare and respond. We know that donors and funders work very closely with your regional associations, and so there's some information contained within the playbook that talks about those particular strategies and actions that the regional associations have taken in cooperation with their philanthropic members. And of course, the nonprofit sector and government agencies are critical partners in disaster preparedness and recovery. So we wanted to call out to them to make sure that they know that, you know, we believe this information will also benefit them. And in keeping with CDP's value of creating a community of practice, we hope that this will help to sort of strengthen the network of people who are working in this field all around the country. So we're going to scroll further down, and this is a module on the homepage which highlights an impact story. You see up at the top of the site in our main navigation area up here, we have a section called Impact Stories, and these are essays that highlight challenges and impact that the philanthropic community has had in their own community. So this module on the homepage gives us an opportunity to highlight a particular story. So right now, we have a piece on Indiana's Washington County Community Foundation and their work in response to a deadly tornado. But these stories on the homepage will change relatively frequently, and it's an opportunity for us to really call attention to the very important work that's happening around the country. So now we're going to scroll further down, and we see a module that is Disaster Philanthropy News. And these stories are curated by the Center for Disaster Philanthropy, and it'll be updated frequently as new information comes available. What this section is not is the CNN of disaster news, right? So we're not publicizing news around a particular disaster, but rather news around the philanthropic sector's response or actions or information or research around disaster philanthropy and how that can help the community. So we're going to continue to scroll down the page, and you see an area called Sign Up for the Playbook, receive updates and customize your own disaster playbook. So this section has two purposes. The first is that we obviously want to capture information on the playbook's visitors and users in order to communicate with everyone and alert folks when there is new information and material posted on the site. But the second purpose and key component of the playbook is that we built the site to allow users to create your own playbook. We want the philanthropic and nonprofit community to be able to access the information that is most relevant to all of you, and in a manner that is not only expeditious, but also collaborative. So we've created this My Playbook function that allows users to curate content that matches their objectives, creating their own personal playbook that can then be shared with your colleagues. So we were very excited when Oki and his team presented this idea to us, and we're looking forward to seeing how folks use this function and what we might learn from it and how we might be able to benefit, to actually add to some of the functionality. So I'm going to show you here, this is an example of what a My Playbook can look like. So I've pulled some different information from throughout the site. You see here that I've curated some information on community and economic recovery and advocacy and legal aid. There's housing and environment. You also see that there's a section on lessons learned. I've pulled in some impact stories. And then I've also pulled in some other resources and guides. So as we go through the walkthrough today of the site, this will become a little more obvious to you how you can use this functionality to create your own playbook around the issues and information that matter most to you. So I want to point one other thing out to you here. You see a module called Share Your Playbook. So this is built into every page on the site, where no matter where you are throughout the playbook, you can share the information out on Facebook, on Twitter, via email, and you can also print it. So once you compile information that matters to you and your own work, you can then share this in a variety of different ways with your colleagues. So now let's go back to the main site, and we're going to scroll back up to the top of the homepage. So as I'm scrolling, you should see a red box which says Playbook Now, and I'll call your attention to this here. So this has been traveling up and down the page with us. This function is only activated in times of disaster. And this Playbook Now section, and up here in the top left, CDP Texas Flood News, if you see this, these two are both connected. So when a disaster has hit, we wanted to recognize and we wanted to help the community access some information really quickly. You know, we believe that you're going to get the most out of using this playbook when you have the time to dive deep into the strategies and the lessons learned and the resources that are contained within the site. But we also recognize that we're going to have some people coming we're going to have some people accessing the playbook when a disaster has just hit in a time of crisis. And therefore, we know you don't have a lot of time to sit back and read through all of the information. So this will be a curated section that will look very similar to the My Playbook page, where the folks at CDP are going to pull some information together that can be helpful, particularly for a first-time user, to sort of get you know, get up to speed on a couple of actions and strategies that you can take right away in the days and weeks following disaster until such time as you have a little bit more time to dive deeper into the content and you know, the specific information that's contained that will help you do your work. So this module is activated now so that you can see it and be aware that it's there, but in the next 24 hours, we're going to deactivate it. And this language that's here, learn about strategies and resources that could be useful to your community when faced with a disaster like the recent Texas and Oklahoma floods, that is just an example of the kind of language that might exist, you know, in this box when a disaster has hit. Okay, so I'm going to close this down now. And the last thing I'll say with this is that this, in the top left, this button here, will actually take us to the Center for Disaster Philanthropy's main website, so that when a disaster hits, for those of you who are regular users of the information that's contained on CDP's site, you know that they always have information about new funds that they've developed in response to crises, you know, both nationally and globally. And so that button will take you to information about that particular disaster that has just hit on CDP's site. So let's take a look at the main navigation section of the website. So we see strategies, and we see collaboration, impact stories, resources, and the About Us section. So we're going to go back to strategies, and you see this area has all of many different issues that correspond to Grantmakers' area of focus, right? This section, including every section on the playbook, is built to be expanded and to be added to. So, you know, we hope that in the coming weeks and months and years that the philanthropic community and the regional associations will continue to send in their important information on what they're doing to help their communities prepare and respond, and the lessons that they have learned and guides and materials that all of you are producing. So the entire site is built to be able to expand. So in the coming months, we know that there will be more information in the strategies section. Now you can access any of these strategies by clicking through to any of these boxes, and you can also just click on the strategies button itself and it will take us to a landing page, which we're going to do in just a moment. Collaboration is set up similarly. We've got some response strategies for regional associations and collaborating with FEMA and HUD and state and local governments, which here in New Jersey after Hurricane Sandy, we learned how absolutely critical and vital that those partnerships were and continue to be for the recovery here in our state. We've got impact stories, resources, which are lessons learned, which is this compilation of all of some of the best learning that you have all shared with us, guides and materials, which are downloadable, documents and lists of further reading and reports and research, and then of course the About section. So let's go back to strategies, and we're going to click on this. And this takes us to our strategies landing page, which, as I said earlier, is really the heart of the playbook. And we've got these thumbnails that exist of all of the different issues. And if we scroll over, if we hover over any of these and all of these, we see a brief description of the kind of information that can be found in this particular area. So we're going to dive into one of these strategies right now, and we'll click on Community and Economic Recovery. Now, all of the pages throughout the site that detail the strategies are built and designed in the same way. They're all going to follow this format. So we begin with an introduction, which, let's go back here, which sets up the issue. And then we're going to move to the innovative practices. You see we've got some video embedded here. And these detail the actions that philanthropy can take around this issue. We're going to scroll down and we see some more video. We then have a summary, which are the key takeaways. We'll keep scrolling. And then you see the section on further reading. So the further reading are links out to other reports and studies and research and articles that we've compiled that are around this particular issue, whatever issue we're in. We happen to be in community recovery and economic development right now. So you also see that on the right side of the page, we have this navigation bar, which travels down the page with us. And also, if we click on any one of these sections, it will jump to that particular area, right? I'll also say that the site was also built with responsive design. So if you're looking at this on your tablet or your smartphone, Oki and his team have done a really wonderful job at creating some very user-friendly platforms, particularly on the mobile site, because we understand, we recognize that a lot of people are going to look at this site from their phone when a disaster has hit, because for those of us who have been through a disaster, we know that we're not always sitting at our desk in times of crisis. So we're hoping that the mobile platform will be very user-friendly for folks. We also, under innovative practices, I want to draw your attention to another section, which is called funder-specific innovative practices. This exists in each one of the strategies, and this area contains some more of the information that we received from the philanthropic community at large. This is examples of some of the specific work that each grant maker has done around particular issues. So you see here we've got the Vermont Community Foundation and the New Jersey Recovery Fund. All of the grant maker names are hyperlinks to your websites. And we'll scroll down, you see a few more examples here. Again, this section is built to be expanded, so as more information comes in from the philanthropic community, we can add your information at any time on a rolling basis. So the last thing I want to point out in the strategies is that, excuse me, we have a tip sheet. So we'll scroll down to the tip sheet here. This exists at the bottom of every one of the strategies, and it's a downloadable sheet that looks like this. And this contains 15 different actions that philanthropy can take in order to help your community respond and recover. So there are 5 actions around preparedness, and there are 5 actions around immediate response, and there are 5 actions around long-term recovery. So this is a downloadable file that you can keep on your own computers and you can share with your colleagues. So we'll go back here, and of course you see on this navigation that you can save any of this and all of it to your playbook, and you can share this out again on social media, via email, and you can print it. You also see that we have some videos that are embedded into this section. We've got a number of videos throughout the site. We've got some photographs. We have audio files that we received from folks. So each one of the strategies contains different kinds of information. So now let's take a look at collaboration. And this landing page is set up similarly to the strategies, and we have our 3 areas here: response strategies for regional associations, collaborating with FEMA, HUD, state and local governments, and funder collaboration. So we'll just take a look at the response strategies. Again, it's set up very similarly to the strategies, and we have our main right side navigation here. We've got the introduction, which sets up what regional associations do. All of you who are members of your regional association, you know this, but we recognize that there are folks who are going to be using the playbook and accessing this information who might not fully understand the key role that regional associations play with their members in response to disaster. So we wanted to make sure that that was clear for folks who are not familiar with the Regional Association Network and the forum. Then we have innovative practices that regional associations have done in cooperation with their philanthropic members. We've got a few photographs here, and then we have some key takeaways. And then we have a listing of the regional associations who contributed to this section. So we'll go back up here to the top, and we'll take a look at the impact stories. So as I mentioned earlier, these are blog-like stories that highlight the challenges of disaster response and the achievements of colleagues throughout the philanthropic and nonprofit sectors. So you remember on the homepage, we have that module that will highlight an impact story, and that will change over time, so we'll be able to highlight all of the different stories. Again, this is a section that is built to be expanded, so we're happy to receive your stories and your blogs on your good work so that we can, tell the story of disaster preparedness and response in another way, right? This is an area for sort of an in your own words type area. And that it's ready to take more stories as they come in from the field. So we'll just take a look at one of the stories so you can see how this is set up. Let's see here, come on. There we go. Sorry, that took a moment to load. So you see when we have some photographs, they're contained within. I know some of the stories contain some video. And we have a call out reminding folks that if you have a story that you want to share that you think would be helpful for others, to please send it into to the Playbook email address. So now let's take a look at resources. As I mentioned before, this is a section that has a lot of downloadable materials. So the first section that I'll show us is the lessons learned, and this is a compilation of some of the best learning that you all have shared with us. We've organized this into sort of three major areas: immediate relief, recovery and rebuilding, and then preparedness. So if we take a look at immediate relief, we've set it up where we have key points to remember, and then actions philanthropy can take. And we've done the same for recovery and rebuilding, key points to remember, actions philanthropy can take, and again for preparedness. So you see you can save any of this to your My Playbook, and you can share it out with your colleagues around the field. So we'll scroll back up, and we'll go back to resources, and we'll take a look at the guides and materials. Sorry, there we go. Sorry, there seems to be a little delay there. So the guides and materials are a wide cross-section of the experiences and knowledge and the opinions and the research that the philanthropic field at large has written and has shared with us. So again, we extend a huge thank you to so many of you who have sent in this information. I'll point out the legend here. You can either download these files directly to your computer, or you can save it to your My Playbook. So you don't have to open it in order to save it to your My Playbook. And we'll just scroll down so you can see an example of some of the type of information that's included in this section. Again, this is built to be expanded upon. So if you have a guide or a resource that you want to be included here, please don't hesitate to send it to us. And we'll take a look here at further reading. Now, you might remember I had mentioned in our strategy section here that each of these particular strategies has a section on further reading. So this section on further reading does not duplicate the reports or the studies that you might find in each of those strategies, but rather we've tried to compile some additional information, and some of them that take a more of a 30,000-foot view on disaster preparedness and response, or are disaster specific, because there's a lot of really helpful, smart and beneficial information that has been written by many of you on the webinar today around a specific disaster. So you see here we've got a couple of reports from the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. If you haven't seen CDP's latest Measuring the State of Disaster Philanthropy, I highly recommend that you take a look at this. Then we go into some disaster-specific reports. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with some of these. And then we have some additional specific, issue-specific reports: aging and disabled and vulnerable populations, arts and culture, education, the environment, health and mental health, and housing and community planning. So lastly, we'll go to the About section. I'm only going to point out a couple of things here because this contains really all of the traditional information that we all know exists on an About Us section, but you can read a little bit about the Center for Disaster Philanthropy and the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers and the Forum of Regional Associations of Grantmakers in the About Us section, and the Our Story, how we came to develop the playbook. Of course, we're very grateful for the playbook sponsors, which I'll point out here: the Rita Allen Foundation, and Johnson & Johnson, PSE&G, UPS, Oklahoma City Community Foundation, and the Vermont Community Foundation. As you all know, we could not have done this, created this playbook without their support, so we're extremely grateful to them. I also want to point out that when you're talking to your colleagues about how they can use the playbook, and hopefully, you know, for the full benefit of all of your organizations, there's a section here called How to Use the Playbook. So it's a step-by-step detail of how you can use the My Playbook function to its fullest extent. And so all of these instructions are here. It takes everybody through. We hope that it's very clear and user-friendly. If it's not and you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. But you can take a look at this section and hopefully it's all clear for you and your colleagues. And the last thing I'll say here is there's a section on media, and right now this section is populated just with a couple of images of the playbook logo. So you're welcome to download these files. It's an SVG file, which would end up being a click-through from your website or your e-newsletter directly to the playbook site. And then, of course, there's a PNG file and a JPEG file here. So we're grateful to many of you who have said to us that you're willing to help us announce the playbook and make sure that your colleagues and that your specific communities and regions know about it so that they can access the information that's contained herein. So you can feel free to use these logos, and we can always get you additional information in order to help you do that. So thanks for helping us to promote your good work and the work of all of your colleagues by sharing the announcement of the playbook in your communities. So I think that's about it, Bob. I do want to show one more time. So now that we've gone through it and you've seen the function of saving to My Playbook, I'll just show you this page one more time. So this is a sample My Playbook. So maybe it makes a little bit more sense now that we've actually gone through the site. And you can see how you can curate the pieces of this website, the information that is most useful to you, because we recognize that all of the information contained in this site will not be helpful to everyone. That wasn't the goal. But we do hope that you can curate pieces of information that will help you do your work better and in a more efficient and effective manner. So let's see here. I'll take us back to the home page. And Bob, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Elizabeth. We've been listening to Elizabeth Murphy, who led our efforts to build the playbook. And if you've got a question for Elizabeth, you can submit a question at any time using either the Q&A or the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. Select Host from the drop-down list, type your question, and hit Send. And we'll be getting to your questions in just a minute. But it's now my pleasure to introduce Nina Stack, who's the president of the Grantmakers, who played a really key leadership role in helping us create the playbook. And Nina's going to give us some tips and some reflections on how you can use the playbook. Nina, thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Bob, and thank you, Elizabeth, for a great overview. And Council of New Jersey Grantmakers has really been thrilled to be able to work with the Center for Disaster Philanthropy in the creation of the playbook. As we've touched on through the webinar so far, of course, Hurricane Sandy was a transformative event for New Jersey and also for the Council. We learned an enormous amount. When the storm hit, within a day or two, I began hearing from some of my colleagues around the country offering help and sharing with us some of the strategies that funders had used when disasters had struck in their communities, whether it was Katrina or in Alabama when the tornadoes hit, Hurricane Irene up in Vermont. Everyone, it's such a generous community that we are with, generous of spirit, and wanting to help in any way they could. We at the Council immediately began a series of calls every week after the storm hit, and did that for several months. And so we were able to have a lot of those colleagues come online and share with our folks and others around the country who wanted to know how to help. and I thought we've got to capture this information. There needs to be a way so that we can learn from each other, that people don't have to reinvent the wheel, especially at a time of crisis and when the resources are limited and we want to be as effective as possible. So we were really thrilled to talk with Bob and the folks at the Center for Disaster Philanthropy on how we could work together, and then to bring in my colleagues from around the country through the Forum Network. That was the way to go, because these stories, so many of them have come through that Forum Network. Many of you are members, as Elizabeth mentioned, of your regional associations. And I want to encourage you, if you've got a great strategy that you've used after a disaster in your communities, please let us know. This is an evergreen resource that will continue to be updated, as has been mentioned. And I truly believe it's going to change the way and actually improve the way in which funders and others respond when a disaster hits. We were very deliberate in the design, as it has been discussed, to center it around issues, because we know that most funders have key issues that is their wheelhouse. I'm a housing person, I'm a community development person, I'm about education. And so we wanted to make this as efficient for you in those times to understand what others have done. But then also for those that are generalists, it gives an enormous amount of background information and different ways in which you can respond. I want to thank particularly the folks who have helped, the foundations and the companies who have helped to underwrite this. We couldn't have done it without Rita Allen Foundation as the lead funder on this, and all of the others. It's been enormously helpful. There's some more things that we wish to do. If there are others that are interested in helping to support the playbook, there's more work to be done. So I'm not going to lose the opportunity to make that pitch on this call if that might be of interest to the work of your organization in helping to support that. The way that we learned it was to share among peers, and I think it's carrying that spirit forward with the playbook, so that because we know what's worked and what hasn't worked when we've tried it, and so that's where I'm so enormously proud to be able to have this resource for everyone that will continue to go on and help all of us be better at our jobs. I think with that, I'll stop and encourage folks, if you've got questions about the playbook, we're happy to answer them. I'll also just say that, because I know we have some folks on the line that are not funders, but that might be with nonprofits that are responders or government agencies, the focus of this webinar and of the playbook is how funders can respond. So we won't be getting into where there might be grants available for certain kinds of work. That's not the focus for this call. But we are anxious to answer any questions that folks may have about how to best use the playbook. Bob, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. That was Nina Stack, President of the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers. And if you do have a question, you can use the Q&A or the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. Select Host from the drop-down list, type your question, and hit Send. Elizabeth, we're starting to get some questions in, and this first one is from a correspondent wanting to know if we have any focus on rural areas, and that would be small populations of under 10,000 or so, as opposed to urban disaster planning.
So that's a great question, and I would say that we do have information about rural communities, and you can find that within, I'm going to go back here and share my screen again. You know, the Vermont Community Foundation shared a tremendous amount of information with us when they responded to Hurricane Irene. So I'll go back here and show you an impact story on them. And they did a lot of work with their rural community. So you can read about their story here, and then you can also see in the Community and Economic Recovery section that I pointed out earlier, some of those videos are going to talk about their work in response to their rural communities. So we have not organize the playbook around a particular disaster or around urban or suburban or rural work. It's all around those issues, but you can find that information if you go to the, if you kind of search through under strategies and collaboration, you're going to find different information that will specifically deal with rural community. And of course, the Vermont Community Foundation has a lot of good information on that.
So Elizabeth, if one of the people listening today has content or experiences that they think ought to be in the playbook and shared with others, what should they do now? What's the process we're going to use for that?
Absolutely. So the process, so there's on the site, I'll scroll down here and you can see built into the header is a statement where we say, share your knowledge, submit your strategies, lessons learned, resources, and impact stories to playbook@disasterphilanthropy.org. So if you have information, if any of the folks on the call today or anybody else who will be listening to this at a later date has information that they want to share, they can send it via email to that email address. We also will either share out or maybe post on this site for a download a form that people can use where you can, give us the paragraph so that you can be highlighted in the strategy section. I'll go back here to one of the strategies and remind folks that there's this area where you can have your own particular story highlighted in funder-specific innovative practices. So we'll go here. So these are paragraphs. You can send your paragraph in at any time, and we're happy to post this up on the site. And then if you have a guide or material, you can send it via email. And if you just have some lessons learned and information that you want to share that you don't think is contained, just email us. But we'll have a form pretty soon that folks can use as a guide.
Can I just offer on this, for example, you're on the Advocacy, Legal Aid, and Public Policy, and, one of the great things that we learned in Hurricane Sandy, well, one of the most helpful things, I'll say, was the issue that our residents are going to be facing around legal needs and legal aid, and that's something that we learned from the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund and its work in and Jarrah Strebling in Alabama after the tornadoes hit there, which we weren't familiar with, and they had a great story of how they enlisted law school students as a strategy. And so that was enormously helpful in our folks in thinking about what it is that they can support, what they can, with their grantees, how they need to be thinking about things. So those stories really do make a difference of how people have responded.
Great, thanks, Nina. Elizabeth, a couple of questions have come in about wanting to know the rules, I guess, for using the playbook. Is this for members only, and is there a cost associated with using the playbook?
No, there is no cost associated with using the playbook. Of course, I'll say I'm sure that the Center for Disaster Philanthropy welcomes donations to keep the playbook going and to maintain, the addition of new content. And, it would be great to shoot some new video and other things like that for the playbook. But this is, this is a gift to the national community that has come from many of you on the call today. As Nina just said and Bob has said, we learned this information from all of you. So this is a compilation of the best strategies and the best learning and specific actions that the philanthropic sector can take in cooperation with its nonprofit grantees and government agencies and FEMA and HUD and local offices of emergency management. It's a compilation of all that best work, and it's a gift back to the community at large for all of us to use and benefit from as the disasters continue to increase. So it's not a protected site. It's available for anyone to access.
Right, and I'll add to that we had very generous donors for this first phase, as we're calling it, and that covered the cost of all the research and production and development we went through. And our hope is that we're going to continue to add material and video interviews, and as Elizabeth was saying, continue to make this the repository of best thinking about about disaster philanthropy and disaster-related activities. And so those additional phases, additional projects or events, activities, we also hope that we'll be able to cover through philanthropic contributions to the playbook going forward. And so it's going to take both philanthropic contributions as well as content contributions from all of you to keep this playbook lively and up to date. Elizabeth, another question from someone out there asks about in-kind contributions. Do we discuss that at all in the playbook, and do we have thoughts about updates on products and donations?
Thanks for that question. So I'll point out here, under strategies, we do have a section called product donations. And I think if I'm understanding the question around in-kind donations, I think this is what you're asking about. So we've learned from a number of grant makers, specifically corporate grant makers, on how they have responded to their community. So here's a great video that UPS has shared with us. And we know that, you know, donations and goods and services that are in alignment with your company's mission, depending on what you do, can include food and clean drinking water and medicine and medical supplies and clothing, logistics coordination and tracking, telecommunications. I won't read the whole list, but you can all see it here. And here's a photograph of some medical donations from Johnson & Johnson. And then, of course, we've got some key takeaways and further reading and specific innovative practices. So if we have grant makers on the call today who have experience in in-kind donations and product donations, we would like to receive that information so that we can highlight your good work here in this section. I'll scroll through here and you can see examples of some of the kinds of information that we've received from the community.
So Elizabeth, that's information about product donations. How about volunteers? Another question just came in about volunteer engagement, community volunteers and so forth. And is there a separate strategy for volunteers, or is it woven throughout the playbook?
You know, that's another great question. We don't have a separate section on volunteers simply because we didn't receive information specific to philanthropy, organizing, or mobilizing a volunteer corps. That's not to say that it can't be added into the playbook, right? Like, and in our experience and with the research that we did and the information we received, volunteers are primarily organized by either the nonprofit sector or often the local governments and the Office of Emergency Management, and sometimes, you know, the Department of Volunteerism at the state level if it has been, you know, a huge statewide disaster. So our experience thus far has not been that philanthropy has actually organized and mobilized the volunteer effort. So if there are folks out there who, from the philanthropic point of view, have done that work, we'd like to receive that information, and we can build out a chapter on volunteerism. You know, we were careful. There's a fine line between what philanthropy has supported with its nonprofit partners and what philanthropy actually did. So we were trying to walk that fine line because otherwise it would be impossible to create a resource that also included everything that the nonprofit sector was doing and then everything that government agencies were doing. So it's always, the focus here we have led with, what did philanthropy do?
So here's another question about content, and this correspondent wants to know whether there's information in the playbook about long-term recovery committees, and if so, what type of success did they report?
So yes, so we have some information here. I think if we take a look at the long-term recovery committees and the BOADs, right, which are voluntary organizations active in disaster. So information on them is weaved throughout the playbook because, as we know, they have an integral part in disaster preparedness and response and recovery. The work of the long-term recovery committees are talked about in some of the impact stories. So I know that if we go here in the Ocean First Foundation story, they talk a lot about their work with the long-term recovery committee in Ocean County. And actually here's a photograph of the work that they did with them and helping people get back into their homes. There's also some mention of the long-term recovery groups and BOADs in this section, I believe, working with FEMA and local government offices. So, but again, there isn't a particular section on the BOADs. There's also information on the BOADs in the CNJG impact story as well.
Elizabeth, a question about customization. Could you go through that? You discussed it a little bit, but maybe you could go back and remind everybody, how do you customize the playbook for your particular organization and your particular maybe type of disasters and type of activities?
Sure thing. So we'll go back to strategies again, and let's say we'll pull up the section on mitigation and preparedness. And you remember that we've got the right navigation bar, which is located on every single page throughout the playbook. So whether we're in strategies, collaboration, in the resources section, or impact stories, we have this bar. And we can share every single page that exists on the website in multiple ways. So you might have a Facebook group that you use with colleagues, which is a closed group, and you can share information either publicly on your own Facebook pages, which are open to all of the people who are connected to you, or you can save it within your own Facebook group. So you can curate information that way. You can also curate it using Twitter and also share it out or start a conversation around a particular issue that's in the playbook, with your colleagues. You can also email it and you can print it. If you save it to your My Playbook, this is your opportunity to curate all of the information that matters most to you. So we'll go back here to the My Playbook where I'm logged in, and you'll see, again, an example of what your own playbook could look like. So you'll pull those strategies that matter most to you and to your grant-making area of focus, and you can pull those resources and the impact stories and the guides and materials. So if I were to click on here, creating order from chaos, this was the great Jesse Ball DuPont Fund publication around the Alabama tornadoes. You have it right here. So I've saved it in My Playbook, and then you have access to this report, readily available to you. So this is the way that you can actually customize the information that's contained within the playbook in a way that we hope is, expeditious and collaborative and highly effective for you to do your work in a better way.
Great. So Elizabeth, final question. Remind us once again, what's the website address for the disaster playbook? And if people have questions or suggestions, what do they do?
So our disaster playbook address is www.disasterplaybook.org. And if folks have any questions or want to reach us, they can send an email to playbook@disasterphilanthropy.org, which is down here. This exists in the footer of every page. Of course, you can always reach out to anyone at the Center for Disaster Philanthropy or CNJG or the Forum of Regional Associations of Grantmakers if you have questions, although they might be saying they're not set up to handle all the questions about the playbook. But certainly send your questions to playbook@disasterphilanthropy.org, and we'll make sure that we get them answered. The last thing that I wanted to say is, we've talked a lot about response, right? We've talked a lot about response and recovery, but preparedness is probably the most important, component of disaster response and recovery, because if we and our organizations and our communities are better prepared, it makes a tremendous difference in the response and recovery. So we hope that as folks dive into this information and start to really tease out those things that you can do, don't just think about it as a response. Put this information into practice ahead of time so that that helps you actually build a robust and comprehensive preparedness plan, right? So it's not just about responding. It's about reading through and making this information your own so that you're really better prepared to respond, and that will create a more resilient community for all of us nationwide.
Okay, I want to just say thank you again to Elizabeth Murphy and to Nina Stack, the president of the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers, and then to David Beamsdorfer from the Forum of Regional Association of Grantmakers for their help in producing today's webinar. And for all of you, over the coming year, we hope to continue this shared learning experience with all of you by developing further advice and materials. So please check the Playbook website regularly, as Elizabeth's been saying, for updated information, where we are and what we are doing, so that you can learn with us and keep us informed of your work as well. Our hope is that everyone listening today saw places in the Playbook that applied to them. The Playbook is, after all about collaborating with a multitude of partners, all of you listening today, on a level that ensures organizations and communities affected by disasters have access to the resources they need to recover and to build more resilient communities. Thanks so much for your time, and have a great afternoon.